fellas.
Good morning.
And again, once again, we're here at the Boot House in a nice warm place. Isn't it a wonderful gift to be here? I'm just thinking about the graciousness of these owners over a course of close to now, we're somewhere close to 30 years.
And they're trusting us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
Here's the key, make coffee,
Yeah.
don't steal anything.
And that, yeah, here's the key. Use our coffee and just don't steal anything. That's pretty basic. It's a wonderful gift. So, well, this morning we're going to move on to the next section. We're moving off of the story of Nicodemus. I've called it the Night Seeker. And we're moving on into the next section towards the end of chapter 3. We'll have a few weeks here in this area, but the text begins. If somebody could get ready to read this, today we'll look at 22 through 30, but it begins with after these things. So after the story of Nicodemus, after this time in Jerusalem, where Jesus had this encounter. So anyway, could somebody read verses 22 through 30?
After this, Jesus and his disciples went out into the Judean countryside, where he spent some time with them and baptized. Now John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because there was plenty of water, and people were constantly coming to be baptized. This was before John was put in prison. An argument developed between some of John's disciples and a certain Jew over the matter of ceremonial washing. They came to John and said to him, "Rabbi, that man who is with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, well, he's baptizing and everyone's going to him." To this John replied, "Man can only receive what is given him from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Christ, but am sent to heaven. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him, and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is not complete. He must become greater, I must become less."
Okay, good. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for reading. So, the way that I'm going to just kind of give an overview of where we've been. I'm constantly looking back at the book of John as the writer is writing the book and putting the pieces in place. Rather than just random thoughts, no writer writes anything with random thoughts. So John has an idea. He's got ideas. He's got purpose in what he's writing. And so, I'm constantly going back and looking back at how this all fits. Well, just by way of review, I'm looking at this is one point in the book where we're now seeing John's final witness. Now, I think we underestimate or undervalue the role of John the Baptizer in the early history of the church. I think he was the guy that really drew people together, and he had huge influence on the people of around the time right before and during the time of Jesus. So and this text today bears that out. Well, the way John the writer has cast John the Baptizer in his early development of the book is just that John the Baptizer had a major role, and so even in in verse 5 of chapter 1, John the Baptizer is mentioned and clarifying his role. So John's witness, the section we're looking at today, is going to be sandwiched between two hamburger buns. And here's the lower hamburger bun. John's first witness, John 1:15 through 34. That's where John's verbal witness, although he's mentioned in verse 5 or 6 of the first chapter. Then now we're seeing his final witness. This is the section we're in now. And then, so that's the top of the hamburger bun. That's the top bun. And so you got these two nice buns, and then sandwiched in between are the stories, is what the writer John has given us up to this point. You have the calling of the disciples. And I'm just tagging a key idea behind each of these movements through the gospel up to this point. And so I'm saying that, okay, the calling sandwiched inside the buns are calling of the disciples. That's the idea of vision. You know, what is this? This is the newness of moving ahead, the idea of vision. The miracle at Cana, abundance, the abundance of the turning the water into wine, the abundance of the new kingdom, the kingdom that Jesus is bringing. The cleansing of the temple. You know, not far in the book do we get pushback. The pushback inside the context of the jungle. Remember, we're looking at the jungle. So pushback, and then finally the night seeker that we just wrapped up is the idea of invitation. The one coming to Jesus by night. So, you know, this is how I see it, and it kind of brings some cohesion to the book thus far, but we're focusing in on this section here.
Looks like a Whopper.
It does. It's nice looking burger there, I think.
Mike, just an observation of that all could have been chronological, but the temple seems to, the writer John seems to take the temple episode and pull it out of chronology and insert it way up front in the sandwich.
Well, that happens to be my view. But the way a lot of commentators look at it, there were actually two temple cleansings. So we actually talked about that. Probably it was before you were here. Yeah. But no, that's my view. Is that John, for reasons, put it at the beginning. So, and you know,
I'll audit that course.
What's that?
I'll audit that course.
Yeah.
When this.
You can look it up somewhere.
Yeah.
So what we have here, and could somebody get ready to read verses 22 through 24? We're going to work through the text incrementally, this story here. And what we have in the story now is two concurrent ministries. There's two parallel ministries going on, M1 and M2. M1, ministry 1, is represented by John the Baptizer and his disciples, and M2 is the new show in town and represented by Jesus and his disciples, and they're both doing the same thing. And so that's what the backdrop of this story is within the jungle. We can't forget that Jesus is now in the jungle, in the world as we know it. So could somebody read verses 22 through 24?
After these things, Jesus and his disciples came into the land of Judea, and he was there spending time with them and baptizing. John also was baptizing in Aenon, near Salem, because there was much water there, and people were coming and were being baptized, for John had not yet been thrown into prison.
Okay, so again, things that tend towards the importance of John is the writer John mentions it, so the readers can say this was before John the Baptizer was placed in prison. That's an important piece to the early readers. And there's two locations. Normally, when a location is mentioned, I show it on a map. Well, it's no one really knows where Aenon is. It's probably in the Jordan Rift, somewhere along the Jordan River. But there's basically, for our purposes, two distinct areas where this baptizing is going on. So two concurrent ministries and two locations. So then we move to the next slide. Notice the ministries are close, parallels, but yet they're different. You know, you got M1, which is a hard box, M2, which represents ministry 2. Now, now in 25 through 26 is induced what I'm calling jungle talk. This is the framework that two concurrent one of the two ministries, and this is so common in all of my experience in what I see is you got this thing going on, two ministries for good, but we have in the midst of this jungle talk that we're all familiar with. And that jungle talk is in 25 through 26. So could somebody read that?
Argument developed between some of John's disciples and a certain Jew over the matter of ceremonial washing. They came to John and said to him, Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, well, he is baptizing, and everyone is going to him.
You get the jungle talk?
Yeah.
Is it, we're losing out. We're losing market share here. You know, that's how we would put it.
Stealing sheep.
And you know, being in a ministry, Christ in the Rockies, you know, I've had to deal with this kind of thing. And it's the idea that, you know, well, what are they doing? You know, and I've had people come to me that are doing similar ministries, and I could tell that they're operating out of this frame of reference. Well, what do you do? Are you doing this? You know, and we as just human beings, Christian or not, tend to operate under this construct, and this construct is that what I'm involved with is probably the most important, and if somebody else gets involved, I am perceiving that as lost. You know, it's the way we think, and it's the jungle identifier is this idea of comparison. We tend to compare what we're doing with other people or with what other people are doing with us. That is a jungle piece of reality that we all live in, Christian or not. I mean, God, in the church it runs rampant. You know, XYZ church, you know, come to our church, you know, for these reasons, and this competition through comparison that comes up. So there is the jungle context. These ceremonial you read the ceremonial washings or purifications. I don't really have a lot of data on, and as I was doing my research, it's all conjecture, you know, what it was. But whatever it was, brought this issue. They're doing it this way, and we're doing it this way, but they're winning.
Maybe they were sprinkling.
Yeah, maybe so. That probably, yeah.
Why, you can't do that.
You know, we're just, yeah. So here's the deal. So then we move in the story to John's response. And notice now I've taken this comparison, this jungle talk, the diagram, and I've moved it out, and I've weakened it. You know, I've weakened it physically, so now it's off to the side, and now we're going to put on here John's response to this jungle talk. So, and I think there's a great deal we can learn from this. So, could somebody read 27 through 30?
John answered, "A person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who is the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease."
Well, that's just a mouthful there. So let's work through that text. And so John's response, first of all, we're going to see an arrow come up here. John's response is pointing to something, and that something is his first statement, verse 27, everything is a gift. we're getting an insight into how John the Baptizer is thinking. And he's stating to his disciples in this apparent problem situation of losing market share, guys, listen, from my perspective, everything is a gift. Wow, that's worthy of meditation. In verse 28, he goes on to say that how is it worded? Verse 28, because we read it.
You yourselves are witnesses that I said I am not the Christ.
Right. He's made it very clear, I'm not the Christ, but I'm coming before the Christ. He puts himself into context under this framework of everything is a gift. Now, I've drawn a direct arrow, and I'd like to know from you guys, do you think his statement about clarity of role, is that an outflow of this framework, or is it in parallel too? What do you think is the relationship between these two statements? I think it'd be fun to hear your thoughts. What do you think? You know, John is making a statement here, two statements, and how do the two correlate? What do you think?
I think he's actually understanding the gospel in the sense of God, Jesus is actually a gift from God to him. I think he very early understood that concept, which the Jews had a lot of time hard time understanding.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Topsy. Yeah.
I think John must have read some Fozzie Bear.
And why don't you remind us of Fuzzy Bear?
Be who you is, because if you try to be who you ain't, then you ain't who you is.
There you go. Words of wisdom. Yes.
John knew who he was.
John knew who he was.
He knew who he wasn't. So he explained to people again, this is who I am, this is who I'm not, therefore you must do such and such.
Yeah, it takes a long time in life, a lot of bumps and bruises to kind of come to that realization. But boy, how it simplifies life. You know, if we know who we are, then we know who we don't need to be. And then I think what is the prior to that is the idea that everything is a gift. And I have a role to play within that gift. Within that realm, I have a defined space to play, but it's an important space, whatever that is. Yes.
It's amazing how Paul picks that up in Corinthians. He talks about the body.
Yes.
Some of you do this, all of you are important. Don't lord it over each other.
Yeah. And can you do a loose paraphrase of where you're referring? I mean, 1 Corinthians 12 or Romans
he's
12.
using the body as a metaphor for the church, and he's saying, some of you do not say to the eye, I have no need of you.
Yes.
Do not say to the ear, I don't need you.
Right.
Because people were kind of struggling for people were competing. Who's better, who's bigger,
Yeah.
who's more important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what they were doing. Again, jungle talk.
Yeah.
Jeff, you got to
Well,
talk.
this may be out in left field a little bit, but I was trying to think of what he meant by the gift. And it struck me that he may have been talking about the gift of prophecy. John is a prophet. He is telling about the coming of the Christ. And that's what his ministry has been all about. And he's trying to remind them, hey, what have I been talking about? What have I been prophesying about? I've been prophesying about the Christ. This isn't about me. This is about the Christ, and that's, I told you before, I'm going to decrease because I'm the prophet, but when the Christ gets here, my purpose is done, basically. And I've done what I'm supposed to do. I've used this gift, and now the Christ is here. So can you guys see that?
That's good. That's really good. Go ahead. Yeah.
There's something interesting in parallel here. Up to this point, Jesus is. Later they'll clarify Jesus didn't baptize and his disciples did, but the point is this crew running around is preaching and baptizing, and John's preaching and baptizing. They're running parallel courses, except one is the Messiah and one isn't.
Yeah.
But up to this point, people just see it as two groups of people baptizing, which is a sign of repentance and turning your life around.
Right, yeah.
And both, I mean, it isn't the point, it isn't obvious Jesus is greater than John.
No, it is to us, but not to the first century, not to the readers and to those who were experiencing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, good. So then the next section then, you take these two, however we view these, one as a result of the other or parallel statements, but I think there's a lot over here, a lot of wisdom here for us to gain about a perception, a framework of reality that all of life, everything with it is a gift, and I have a role to play within that. And it sure makes things much simpler. Fozzie Bear helped us back there. And so those two are pointing somewhere, and they're pointing to this great joy that John is experiencing. As a result of this, there is great joy. And read 28 through 29, somebody.
You yourselves are my witnesses, that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. But the friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. So this joy of mine has been made full.
All right, good. So I read in two sources, John the Baptizer is using a common everyday analogy that they were very much in tune with, that we somewhat remotely are in tune with. To put it into our language, we would have the role of the best man at a wedding. The best man is, what was that all about?
We just got it.
You guys having your own deal back there? Okay.
I just said best man.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay, the best man has a role at a wedding, and there are certain things that best man does, like, stands up. It's a responsible role. It's a place of honor. The best friend of the bridegroom, and the toast at the wedding. The best man gives the toast. So it's really a place of honor. So if we take that framework and we look at, it's a similar framework, but the role was a little bit different. And I read this from two sources. I was not aware of this, but during that, their ceremonies would have been a little bit different. But part of the best man's role, the friend of the bridegroom, would be to usher the new couple to the bedchamber and to guard outside so that the couple could have their time to consummate the marriage ceremony. And when the bridegroom would emerge or hear his voice, would know that it's time to rejoice because this marriage has been consummated. And that was part of the role and part of the custom of that day. So that puts it into a framework of the joy that this celebration is consummated. And of course, if we put this little simple analogy within the bigger context of God's love for, in the Old Testament, Israel was mentioned as the wife of God, and of course, what is coming as the bride of Christ is the church. So it's this marriage, intimate relationship that's actually, I think, kind of in view of this little analogy here, and that John is very clear in his role. I'm the friend of the bridegroom. I'm the best man. And he's very clear on that. And that brings him great joy. So out of that, then, is this wonderful statement that comes that I actually been meditating on this for now months, because I've been reading the Gospel of John over and over, and this has really been meaningful to me as my role in life now, as I'm perceiving it, this clarity of vision. And I think this whole text here is all leading, this story is leading to this, that John can make a declarative statement that he must increase, I must decrease. And he's stating that out of joy, because Because, Jeff, I think you nailed it, because all of John's perception, John the Baptizer, his perception is now a trajectory forward. He sees things are good. This is good. And things are moving forward in the one who is to come. And I've played my role, and now my role is one that must decrease. And this trajectory is forward to good news for all of the peoples. And it's just what a wonderful and healthy statement that this is. And, I have a table time. I'm going to end it now, because I'd like for us to dwell on this statement a little bit next week about this idea of what does that mean to us? He must increase, I must decrease, and what that means. So I think I'll end it a little bit early today, and then we'll pick up with this next week. So, any comments on this? We got a little bit of time.
Your idea of the wedding issue, I had a chuckle because in that sense, the friend of the bridegroom is sitting outside the tent protecting them. What's he waiting for? What's happening in the tent? Our puritanical views don't like to dwell on that, but he's waiting for it. The guy saying, "It's done."
Got her done. Well, I don't know, but
that's the consummation, isn't it?
The consummation, though, is it's the union and its relationship and its intimacy,
It's
and
all
I mean, we're dwelling on the vision of the actual act, but it really is pointing to something much larger.
Right. But it is. I mean, without the consummation, weddings could be annulled.
Yeah. Oh, you mean under
Catholic rules? But I mean, the whole idea of a bride and bridegroom, the sexual union was the accumulation of the wedding ceremony, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It still is practiced in some Mideast cultures,
And so can you give us?
particularly Muslim.
So can you
Not
give us?
necessarily, at least what I read just recently, I'm not sure it's always a male sitting outside the room, but there needs to be evidence passed out to the family of the groom, I believe it is, that indicates this was a success. And if it's not, the woman is greatly disgraced along with her family if it's not consummated successfully.
Huh. It
Sort of undoes the whole thing of the dowry and all of that.
Wow.
There's a little pressure there, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, John, I love the clarity of his thinking, of his role, and his vision. And boy, guys, I think especially at our age, there's a lot that we can glean on clarity of focus and vision and our roles in whatever our direction. Yes, Totsi.
I had never looked at that verse before, but actually I kind of take that as a personal statement for me. In other words, when I became a believer, I had to become less, and Jesus was everything. Yeah. So I just had never read that verse before.
Verse 30.
Yeah. So that's the way it hit me, is that he's talking to me too, in terms of my acceptance and belief.
Wait, and what's so? Go ahead, Dave. Yeah.
I think the whole nubbin, if you will, of the consummation. What I find as I continue on my journey and I've not reached the destination, but I think sometimes Christians, and hear me carefully here because I'm not being heretical here. We get hung up on the resurrection. Now, what do I mean by that? Obviously, the resurrection is critical. So is the crucifixion. But that's not all there is to it. Had that not happened, we would not have all the things that we now have and that are coming. So sometimes we get so focused and hung up on the act, the consummation itself, we lose track of what that consummation affords us in our walk and in our maturity. And that to me brings us into a kingdom relationship rather than a religious relationship.
Wow. Thank you. Well, good. We'll I think I'd like to maybe dwell on this just a little bit more next week. We're not in any big hurry.
Well, that's historical.
But you know, here's a man who has been effective in ministry and moving on, and he's seeing his role. I just think that at this stage of life, it's just good to pause a little bit and think about that for us in relation to where we are in life. One more thing, and then
One more thing. You are emphasizing that we've not appreciated the value and the breadth of John's work. And
yeah, it was my thought.
yeah, and I brought this up earlier, and he's repeating. When you go to Luke and you have this encounter where John's disciples come to Jesus and say, John's in prison, and are you the one who should be looking for someone else? And then Jesus says, follow me around a while,
Yeah.
and he leaves. And the setting is there's a big crowd around him, and Jesus starts to praise John the Baptist. No one born of woman is greater than John.
Yeah, that's good.
And then there's this one verse in here, which is interesting. It says, it's parenthetical. It says, all the people, even the tax collectors, when they heard Jesus' words, acknowledged that God's way was right because they had been baptized by John. But the Pharisees and experts in the law rejected God's purpose for themselves because they had not been baptized by John. So there's this concept of there's a lot of people following Jesus had passed through the portal of John. As a matter of fact, almost had to pass through the portal of John in a way. I won't say everybody had to, but the implication here is that John's baptism had prepared the crowds that were following Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's huge.
And where are you reading from?
This is Luke chapter 7, verse 29.
You know,
29, 30.
even later in the book of Acts, there's an instance
They run into John's
where they ran into a bunch of John's disciples, and you know they hadn't heard.
Right.
Yeah, so he had a huge impact. Well, let's end there, and then we'll pick it up next week. So, thank you guys.
Did you find out the